The day the entourage rolled in from the imperial capital, Lila was crouched low beside her kitchen stove. She was tossing dry kindling into the fire. 3 big carriages sat parked right outside her humble cottage. Each one bore a rich green canopy, stitched with one single sharp-cut character in her past life. This exact day had filled her heart with bright, burning hope. Back then she'd worn rags patched over 3 separate times. Ash had caked all over her palms. She'd climbed into one of those carriages, giddy down to her bones. She truly believed she'd finally found her real blood relatives. But hope crumbled fast. It turned out her wealthy birthkin saw her as nothing more than mud. Next to Alara, the girl they'd raised and doted on for years, Lila felt filthy. No amount of scrubbing could wash away the taint of her poor village upbringing in their eyes. That she pushed herself hard. She taught herself to read. She drilled proper noble etiquette. She practiced the zither until her fingertips split and bled. She even learned to glide across rooms without tripping over the hem of her robes. Every sacrifice only earned her birth mother quiet, disappointed sighs. Her past life ended deep inside a dry, stone well in the rear courtyard of the House of One. As she lay dying, she clutched a crumpled half-packet of medicine. She'd begged for that medicine to help her little foster brother Kale. He would never get to take it. Kale starved to death inside a crumbling abandoned temple. Her loving foster mother Mara wasted away from illness and passed alone. Meanwhile Alara, the girl who'd taken Lila's identity, kept shining. She remained the capital's most celebrated young poetic genius, showered with endless praise from every corner of high society. Then Lila woke up again that she was back in her cottage. Outside the door, that familiar voice rang out. It was the head steward from the powerful One household in the capital. "Miss Lila," the steward called. "We serve the Great One clan. You are our long-lost third young lady. You were stolen from us all those years ago." Lila jammed another log deep into the stove. Flames crackled, tiny sparks popped and spat out into the cool air. Mara, her foster mother, dropped her wooden cooking ladle in total shock. Young Kale peeked shyly out from behind the wooden door. His frame was thin, bent like a bamboo shoot beaten by heavy wind. The steward stretched out his hand. Resting in his palm was a smooth jade pendant. "This was tucked inside the swaddling cloth you were wrapped in as an infant." He explained that back in her previous life, seeing that pendant had made Lila burst into tears of joy. This time she simply pushed the stove door shut and slowly rose to her feet. "You've got the wrong girl." Lila told him plainly. The steward froze where he stood. "Miss," he pressed, "you carry a crescent-shaped birthmark high on your left shoulder. Our old matriarch has dispatched search parties for 13 whole years. There can be no mistake here." Lila tugged the collar of her rough linen tunic tighter, blocking him from getting even a glimpse of her skin. 13 years searching," she said slowly. "Why are you only finding me just now?" That very same question had crossed her lips in her former life. Back then, the One household's people had offered ready excuses. They'd said travel roads were treacherous. They'd blamed cunning human traffickers. They swore the One family had never paused their hunt for her. But later on, Lila had overheard an elderly servant close to the old matriarch let a secret slip. The One clan had tracked her down to Greenbank Village 3 full years before they'd sent these carriages. At that time though, Alara had just won huge fame at a capital poetry gathering. The One family couldn't bear to shatter her carefully built reputation. It was only when Alara's promising marriage negotiations hit a wall, and the groom's side demanded proof of her true lineage, that the One household acted. They had no choice but to collect Lila. She was not their beloved long-lost daughter they ached to reclaim. She was merely evidence, a tool they needed to patch up their family's damaged good name. The steward tried one more round of persuasion. Lila turned her back on him. She picked up her clay bowl and ladled out a serving of thin warm porridge for Kale. "My name is Lila May," she stated firmly. "My mother is here. My brother is here. The One family from the capital has absolutely nothing to do with me." The servants standing outside exchanged nervous, uneasy glances. Clearly none of them expected a barely literate farm girl to turn down unimaginable capital wealth. Mara's lips went pale. She gripped Lila's hand tight. "Child," she whispered, "are you afraid? My heart cannot bear the thought of you leaving. But I cannot hold you back from your blood." Lila squeezed her foster mother's rough, work-worn palm. "Mother, I am not going anywhere. In her past life, she'd left in a reckless hurry. She'd dreamed that once she joined the One household, she could bring Mara and Kale along to live lives of comfort. That reality had been cruel. The Wens dismissed Mara as a coarse village woman, unfit to cross their estate threshold. They insisted Kale, having no one blood, could never step foot on their grounds. They'd given Lila hollow promises. They swore they would care for both of her loved ones in her place. Mara's own clan pressured her into handing over the silver coins the Wens had sent. When Mara grew sick, no one came to tend to her. Kale perished in that broken temple. The two people who truly raised her slipped out of this world completely unnoticed. That was her greatest blunder in her past life. She'd abandoned the people who'd kept her alive, to go beg for affection from total strangers. The steward's expression hardened. Young lady, he said sharply. Blood bonds cannot be cast aside with one simple refusal. Lila lifted her chin to meet his gaze. And a foster mother's years of devoted care cannot be brushed off with one single invitation to ride back to the capital. She shot back. Surprise flickered across his face. Given her age and rural upbringing, he never anticipated such sharp words coming from her mouth. Lila knew better than to push too far. Too many unanswerable questions would spark suspicion that the one party could not force her to leave right then. Still, they refused to ride away. The very next day, they rented rooms at the village inn near the town entrance. Before long, the village head showed up alongside several clan elders. They came to pressure Mara. The village head talked on and on. He praised the One household as a respected scholarly clan. He mentioned how Lord One had once served as a tutor for the Imperial Academy. Lady One, he added, descended from a very distinguished noble line. If you return with them, he told Lila, a sparrow becomes a phoenix overnight. If Mara stands in your way, she will ruin your whole future. In Lila's past life, those words had reduced Mara to tears. She'd sobbed exactly like this on the day she'd let Lila leave, convinced she was making the best possible choice for her adopted daughter. But this time around, Lila set a sheet of paper down right in front of the village head. The local village schoolmaster had written it at her request. 3 clear demands were laid out across its surface. First, the One family must formally recognize Mara as Lila's foster mother. They had to draw up a binding legal contract guaranteeing her care in old age. They could never force the two of them apart. Second, Kale had to be allowed to travel to the capital to pursue his studies. The One household would cover every bit of tuition and living cost. Kale would never be forced into servitude. No one in the manor could order him around like a servant. Third, officials had to reopen the old case of Lila's childhood abduction. Formal paperwork would go to Greenbank Village's local authorities. The truth could not get buried just to protect anyone's reputation. The village head's face shifted. Who taught you to write all of this? He demanded. Lila answered him calmly. A person who's been traded away once learns to negotiate terms before agreeing to anything. Those words were not wisdom she'd gained in this new life. Back when she suffered endless humiliations inside the One estate, an old kitchen maid had whispered this lesson to her. Child, that old woman had said. Always lean on paper, contracts, hard proof. Never rely only on tears. Sadly for Lila, she'd heard that advice far too late in her first lifetime. The steward hurried over soon after reading those 3 requirements. His face looked thunderous. Young miss, this is not a joyful family reunion, he said. This reads exactly like a business bargain. Lila held his stare. You knew exactly where I lived 3 years ago, she reminded him. Yet you only came to collect me today. Is that not also a transaction? He jerked his head upward in shock. Her half-truth, pulled from secrets she'd overheard in her prior life, struck home. Still, she held no solid proof. She was only testing him. The steward chose not to push the argument further. That very same day, he sent a fast horse rider racing back toward the capital. Slowly, the One clan began sensing something was deeply wrong. They'd pictured a helpless orphan girl raised out in the countryside. What they did not know was that Lila had spent 8 long years inside the One estate's inner quarters in her past life. She kept her head low, but her eyes stayed wide open. She'd absorbed far more than the household ever imagined she could understand. On the 3rd day, the Wens sent another representative. This time it was Aunt Sula. Back in Lila's past life, Aunt Sula had been Lady Wen's most trusted personal attendant. When Lila first arrived at the manor, Aunt Sula was assigned to drill her in noble manners. She would strike Lila's hands with a wooden ruler. Scolding her crude behavior brought shame upon Lady Wen. Later on, it was Aunt Sula who locked Lila inside the family ancestral hall, forcing her to kneel until she fainted from exhaustion. Now she stood on the threshold of Lila's simple cottage. Her expression remained stiff, cold, unchanged. "Third young lady," Aunt Sula began, "my lady says your conditions are open for discussion." Lila shook her head. "There is nothing to merely discuss. I require documents stamped with official seals." Aunt Sula frowned. "You are, after all, a daughter of House One. Why keep so much distance between us?" Lila's gaze drifted toward the heavy brass key ring hanging at Aunt Sula's waist. Memories stirred. In her past life, Lila had learned that the settlement silver the Wens had intended for Mara had passed straight through Aunt Sula's hands. She'd skimmed well over half of that money for herself. She justified the theft by telling herself a village woman could not safely hold so much silver. That safekeeping money had ended up funding a shop run by her own nephew. Better to keep a safe distance than to act foolishly. Lila responded flatly. Aunt Sula's eyes turned icy. She abruptly turned toward Mara. "Madam Mara," she said. "The young lady is still young. She cannot see all the high-stakes consequences here. If you truly care for her future, you ought to persuade her to come back to the capital." Mara looked over toward Lila, clearly uneasy. Lila understood exactly what tactic the Wens were deploying. In her past life, they'd worked to make her choose to leave all on her own. Since Lila refused to go willingly in this timeline, they would strike at her foster mother to bend her will. Lila cut Aunt Sula off before she could say another word. "Let me ask you something," Lila said. "On the day I was stolen, besides the jade pendant left in my swaddle, what other items were there?" Aunt Sula paused for a beat. "Naturally," she replied. "There was a small infant garment and a golden lock charm." "What was carved onto that golden lock?" Lila pressed. Aunt Sula hesitated. Lila's heart sank back in her past life. She had spotted that very golden lock deep within the one household storage vault. It was not etched with standard blessings for long life and prosperity. 4 hand-carved characters sat upon its metal surface. "Peace beneath the moon." Those words had been written by Lila's birth mother herself. If the one family had truly grieved and longed for their lost daughter night and day, how could this key detail slip their minds? At last Aunt Sula gave her answer. It bore an inscription for fortune and long life, complete and unbroken. Lila gave a thin, cold smile. "Go back. Get your facts straight. Then you may return to speak with me." Aunt Sula stormed away, her face ashen. This was not simple forgetfulness over minor details. The people sent to fetch Lila had never treated her like a real person with a real infanthood history. They'd only brought along the jade pendant, enough to verify her identity. They had never bothered learning about the other belongings from the day she was taken. Once Aunt Sula was gone, Mara turned to Lila and wondered how she knew about the golden lock. Lila took her foster mother's hands and spoke softly. "Mother, I had a dream. In that dream I went to live with the one family. And in that dream, both you and I were gone forever." Tears streamed down Mara's cheeks immediately. She did not press Lila to prove whether this dream was real or imagined. She just held her tight. "Then we will not go," Mara whispered. But the powerful Wen clan would not simply back off because Lila refused their offer. 7 days later, county government officers rode into the village. Their official accusation: when Mara had taken an infant Lila all those years ago, she never finished all the required government paperwork. Lila's origins were unproven. They claimed Mara was under suspicion of illegal human trafficking. Mara's face drained of all color. Kale lunged forward, ready to bite one of the officers. Lila grabbed him and held him firmly back. She remembered this exact play from her past life. It was designed to force Lila to cut every tie to Mara. Back then, when clan relatives had hinted to Lila that Mara had bought her cheaply, Lila had believed part of those lies, and a painful rift had grown inside her heart. Only long after Mara's death had a neighbor told her the truth. Mara had found tiny baby Lila, wrapped in swaddling cloth, abandoned beside a riverbank. She had walked 20 miles through pouring rain to report the found infant to local officials. That same year, though floodwaters had wrecked the county records office. Many official documents had been ruined. Paperwork was incomplete through no fault of Mara's. That in this new life, the Wens seized that very same gap in records as a weapon. Lila did not scream. She did not beg for mercy. Instead, she asked the officers to wait just a short moment. In front of the whole gathered crowd, she carried an earthen clay jar out from underneath her stove. Mara had hidden these things away for 13 long years. Inside sat the rain-stained, sun-dried leftover fragment of that old official report. There was also a written witness statement from the midwife present back then, plus a scrap of the original baby swaddling cloth. Lila had never known where Mara kept these treasures in her first lifetime. Years later, when she'd traveled back to Greenbank Village to visit Mara's grave, a neighbor had told her the story. Right up until her final breath, Mara had clung to that clay jar. Over and over, she'd mumbled that she had never bought Lila. In this present timeline, Lila had asked Mara for the jar ahead of time. Mara had wept so hard she could barely stand as she handed it over. When the county officer saw the partial report, his attitude softened a little. Even so, the one household had prepared thoroughly. The officer still insisted the partial document was insufficient proof of a legal adoption. Who filed that original report? Lila asked him. The one family, the officer answered. Lila nodded slowly. Very well. Then let the county magistrate launch a full investigation. Let us find out exactly who kidnapped the one household's infant daughter all those years ago. Since Houseman claims my background is unclear, they ought not only interrogate my foster mother. They must question the wet nurse who cared for me, the gatekeepers, the carriage drivers, and the very first person who noticed I was missing. Murmurs rippled through the assembled villagers. Aunt Sula stood some distance away, her expression utterly ugly. The Wens had hoped to crush Lila using government authority. Lila had flipped every question straight back onto them. Why had Lila vanished in the first place? Who had taken her? How come 13 years passed before they located her? They dared not let those questions keep echoing. From a dying old servant in her past life, Lila had learned a critical secret. The day she disappeared, no stranger had broken into the estate. Chaos had first erupted from within the one family's own inner courtyard. She had never uncovered every piece of the truth. But one thing she knew for certain. Someone inside Houseman had never wanted her to return home. The county officers would not arrest anyone right away. Still, they agreed to reopen the closed old case file. A crack had split open the one family's perfect public reputation. Villagers of Greenbank started whispering among themselves. If Lila truly was their biological daughter, why had the Wens not raced to hunt down kidnappers? Why had they targeted her poor foster mother first? The very next morning, when household servants arrived carrying sacks of rice, grain bolts of cloth, they presented these as thanks to Mara for 13 years of raising their lost young lady. Mara was afraid to accept these gifts. Lila told her to take them anyway. Working alongside the village head and the schoolmaster as official witnesses, they logged every single item in a ledger. They wrote down exactly how many sacks of rice, how many lengths of cloth, how much silver arrived. They clearly marked its purpose. This was not payment for selling away a daughter. This was fair compensation for 13 years of caregiving. When Aunt Sula learned what Lila had done, she barely maintained her composure. Lila could tell Aunt Sula hated her. That hatred only proved Lila was blocking the corrupt profits she once enjoyed. Half a month later, a letter arrived from the capital. News spread that the old one matriarch had fallen gravely ill. She begged to see Lila one last time. The letter was filled with sorrow. It claimed the elderly grandmother dreamed of Lila every single night, crying so heavily sleep escaped her. In Lila's past life, this letter had softened her resolve. She convinced herself her grandmother truly loved her. Later she understood. The old matriarch only cared that Houseman's bloodline should not waste away out in a rural village. She feared blank spaces opening in the official family genealogy. She had shown Lila small kindness at times, yet that kindness could never outweigh the 13 years Alara had spent at her side. Whenever conflict flared between Lila and Alara, the old matriarch always told Lila she ought to yield. In this fresh life, Lila wrote no reply with her own hand. She asked the village schoolmaster to pen a response for her. It held only 3 sentences. My foster mother is unwell. My younger brother is still young. I cannot travel far from home. If grandmother truly longs for me, she may send a respected clan elder to come meet me in Greenbank Village. Please also bring the paperwork from the original missing person report, the list of household wet nurses, and the ancient public notice of my disappearance. Once that letter was sent out, every villager understood the one clan's attempt to reclaim Lila was going terribly wrong. Everyone saw Lila was not chasing wealth and status. She prioritized uncovering the truth of the old case above everything else. Reputation is such a strange thing. Back in her past life, when Lila knelt within the one manor begging for scraps of affection, people called her greedy and vulgar. They said she only craved riches. Now she stayed inside her crumbling little cottage and refused to leave. Suddenly the same villagers praised her for holding firm to her principles. But good principles alone could not fill empty bellies. The one party lingered in the village, disrupting spring planting work. Mara worried their presence would bring ruin down upon their whole household. Nighttime brought quiet, muffled sobs from her foster mother's room, that pushed Lila to start on her next step. Earning money. She had no grand, brilliant business schemes, no sudden magical talents. But for years in her past life she had done rough kitchen labor inside the one estate. She knew exactly what upper-class capital families hungered for. Wild mountain bamboo shoots, honey-sweet locust blossom pastries, smoke-preserved plums. She knew precisely which goods fetched high market prices. Greenbank Village was poor, yet the surrounding hills brimmed with mountain produce. Once in her prior life, Lila had looked down on these goods as coarse rustic things. She had fixated entirely on mastering the zither and calligraphy. Now she took Kale up the hills to gather locust blossoms. She organized village women to dry the harvest thoroughly. They wrapped the dried blossoms in rough paper. Local traveling peddlers carried these goods into the county market towns. Their first small batch earned merely 300 copper coins. Mara held those coins in her palms and smiled for a very long time. Kale spoke up, eyes shining. Sister, 300 copper pieces can buy so much writing paper. Lila gently patted the top of his head. Studying costs money. Whether we ever go near the one household or not, you need to build your own path in life. Word of this small trade quickly reached Aunt Sula's ears. She sent a sharp message. A daughter of the prestigious one clan ought not to sell goods publicly. It brought shame to the family name. Lila sent her answer back through the traveling peddler. If House One feels shame because of me, then they ought to stop trying to claim me as their kin altogether. When village women heard her retort, they laughed aloud. That laughter spread far and wide, making it even harder for the one household to salvage their dignity. That genuine danger arrived soon afterward. One night, the peddler transporting Lila's mountain goods, was brutally beaten. All the cargo bound for the county got stolen. Even his account books vanished. The attackers had not killed him. They only delivered a clear warning. Never run errands for Lila again. Lila sat beside Hugh's bedside, looking at his swollen, bruised face. Cold dread crawled across her skin. This was exactly what had happened time and again once she lived inside the one manor in her past life. Whenever she tried to learn new skills, dig up facts, or build something for herself, an invisible hand would quietly snuff it all out. This time, she had not even stepped foot inside the capital manor. Yet that destructive hand had already stretched all the way out to Greenbank Village. Lila asked Hugh whether he had caught sight of his attackers' faces. He said he could not see them clearly, but he had caught a faint, distinct scent of agarwood incense hanging in the air. Hired local thugs would never burn expensive agarwood. That was the luxury fragrance noble capital ladies used to perfume their robes. That one name immediately sprang to Lila's mind. Ilara. In her past life, Ilara had always worn a soft, gentle smile. She would pretend to plead for mercy on Lila's behalf, covering for Lila's embarrassing missteps. But right before Lila died trapped in the dry well, she had heard a voice ring out through pouring rain. Do not worry, young miss. She will not stand in your way any longer. She could not identify who had spoken those words back then. In this timeline, she intended to find out. First, Lila paid all of Hugh's medical bills. Then she traveled into town to visit shopkeeper Jove, who owned the local embroidery store. Back in her past life, Lila had stitched embroidered handkerchiefs for Ilara for a full year. She knew shopkeeper Jove regularly shipped embroidered goods to noble women living in the capital. Lila brought him a bundle of dried locust blossoms. She asked him to sell them for her on commission. At the same time, she asked him to quietly investigate which capital households purchase large quantities of agarwood incense.
Szukamy Jowa Azitata.
He did not want to get tangled up in high clan drama. So Lila sold him half of the cloth gifts sent over by the one household, at a heavily discounted price. All she asked in return was that single piece of information. This was no miraculous heaven-sent gift of insight. Lila had finally learned a hard lesson. You only gain negotiating power when you hold something valuable in your own two hands. Half a month passed. Shopkeeper Jove sent word back. That batch of agarwood traced back to a capital perfume shop. And not long before, a maid-serving house when second young lady had made a large purchase there. House when second young lady, that was Alara. Hearing that name felt like a sharp needle pricking Lila's heart. In her past life, she had truly wanted to care for Alara as an elder sister ought to. Alara had taught her how to write her own name. She had shown her how to tell different teacups apart. She kept telling Lila their parents just needed time to grow used to her. Once Lila improved herself, everything would turn fine. Yet every small bit of progress Lila made somehow reached the whole one household. Everyone in the inner estate learned of her most humiliating moments. Folk gossiped about her reading books late at night by lamplight. People laughed when she mispronounced written characters and grew flustered and helpless. When Lila sent small sums of money to help Kale, she got labeled petty and narrow-minded. Only Alara's closest circle of confidants could have leaked all those private moments. Now, in this new reality, Alara was panicking. Lila had refused to travel to the capital. Alara's position as the celebrated replacement prodigy had turned precarious. If House One never brought their genuine birth daughter home, Alara's upcoming marriage prospects would become gossip fodder for the whole capital. If Lila returned while holding firm to her conditions, Alara would no longer be the sole favored young lady of the household. What Alara fought to protect was not genuine love. It was the status and privileges she had spent years building for herself. Lila did not hate Alara simply for being loved. What filled her with cold resolve was Alara's willingness to climb across Lila's suffering to hold on to that comfortable life. Eventually, the capital dispatched the clan's third elder. He was Lord Wen's cousin, known across the clan for his sense of fairness. Traveling alongside him was Alara. She stood at the village entrance wearing a pale moon-white gown. She looked as delicate as a snowflake fallen onto dirt ground. All the village children stared, utterly captivated. When Alara spotted Lila, surprise flickered across her face. Right after that, her features softened into a warm smile. Sister, she greeted her. At long last we meet. In Lila's past life, that single word, sister, had melted her guard and tricked her completely. Lila walked toward her, but she did not open her arms for an embrace. Tell me, Lila said. Should I go by Lila May, or when Lila? Alara froze on the spot. If I am Lila May, Lila kept going, then you have no right to call me sister the instant we meet. If I am when Lila, then you ought to explain exactly which place you hold in the one family birth order. Which courtyard do you occupy? Whose mother and father do you call your own? The air around them turned deathly quiet. Alara's face blanched. Her maid Zia could not hold her temper any longer. Second young lady has served the old matriarch since childhood. Zia snapped. Why must third young lady be so hostile? Lila's gaze locked onto Zia. That was the voice she had heard beside the dry well, all those years ago. She recognized it now. Third elder one frowned and scolded Zia for her outburst. He proved more careful than Lila had anticipated. He did not automatically side with Alara. Instead, he invited everyone inside the cottage to talk. Lila restated her 3 non-negotiable conditions. The third elder stayed silent for a long stretch of time. Regarding your foster mother and brother, he said at last, we can draft formal contracts. We can also reopen the old missing person case. But when it comes to Alara's standing, House One must think of the reputation she has built over many years. Lila answered him directly. So we must protect her good name, and no one needs to talk about why I was abandoned, or how I survived all those years. Third elder one shifted uncomfortably. You have suffered greatly, he told her. Lila had heard those exact words countless times in her past life. Everyone readily admitted she had endured pain. But nobody was willing to yield even the smallest step for her sake. Elder, Lila said, I am not asking Housewind to cast her out. I do not demand she be denied food or shelter. If my name is written into the official family registry, it must state clearly I am Housewind's true biological daughter. Mara must be recorded as my foster mother. Alara may stay as an officially adopted daughter of Housewind, but she can no longer present herself as a true-born biological daughter when negotiating marriage matches. A pin dropping would have echoed in that silent room. Tears spilled down Alara's cheeks. Sister, she cried out. Are you trying to drive me toward death? Lila looked straight into her eyes. In my past life, I never pushed you. Still I died. A flash of pure panic darted across Alara's expression. It was quick, barely noticeable, yet Lila caught it. Alara could not understand how Lila knew so much. Lila offered no explanation. Third Elder One refused to give an immediate answer. He said he would need time to conduct further investigations. That suited Lila perfectly. Let him dig into the past. Let him question old household servants. Once they started talking, hidden truths would start leaking out. That very night, Alara came to visit Lila all alone. She brought no maids. She held only a paper lantern in her hand. Lila, she began. I know you resent me. Whether I resent you hardly matters, Lila replied. Alara lowered her voice. I never chose to take your place willingly. When the one household found me, I was only an orphan. They told me I was close to your age. The old matriarch was heartbroken, and she needed a child to comfort her grief. If I refused, I would have to go back to a cold temple and starve. She spoke softly. Lila could believe part of that story. A desperate orphan grabbing a chance to survive was not evil. 3 years ago, Lila pressed. When the Wen family learned I lived in Greenbank Village, why did you say nothing? Alara fell completely silent. Lila answered for her. Because you were already the capital's most celebrated talented young woman. You stood on the verge of a high-status marriage. If I returned home, you would drop from being Housewind's legitimate daughter to an adopted girl with unknown origins. Alara's eyes turned red. I was only afraid, she whispered. Once upon a time, Lila had also lived in fear. Back then she feared Alara's tears. She feared her birth parents' distress. She feared disappointing her grandmother. So she kept stepping backward again and again, until she tumbled straight down into that dry stone well. Not this lifetime. She would not step back any further. Alara's fingers tightened hard around the lantern handle. How much exactly do you know? She demanded. Lila glanced toward the flickering lantern flame. I know the agarwood incense scent clinging to your clothes matches the scent on the men who beat Peddler who. Alara's face transformed. I never ordered anyone to hurt anybody, she protested. I simply did not want you to drag everything into ugly public light. Lila gave a faint smile. So in your view, me wanting to live with basic clarity and honesty counts as making things ugly? Alara spun around and stormed away. Lila knew she would not give up easily. Third Elder One moved forward investigating the old case. His first lead was Lila's childhood wet nurse. The woman now lived as a lay nun inside a small convent just outside the capital. She told the elder that on the day Lila disappeared, Lady One had taken the infant to visit her mother's household. Their carriage halted at Whitestone Bridge. Lady One stepped away to fetch hot drinking water. When she returned, the baby was gone. Housewind's official public story always claimed violent human traffickers had crashed into the carriage and snatched the child amid chaos. But the wet nurse's testimony suggested fault lay first and foremost with the household's own inner quarters staff. Why had Lady One lied about what truly took place? The wet nurse could not answer that question. She only recalled that before she was dismissed from service at the manor, she had seen Aunt Sula burn a small infant garment stained with fresh blood. If it had merely been a random child abduction, where had that blood come from? Third Elder One dispatched men to follow up on the old events surrounding Whitestone Bridge. 13 years had passed though. The little tea shop beside the bridge had changed owners many times. Almost all trails had gone cold. The one household let out quiet sighs of relief. Yet Lila remembered something she had seen long ago, in her past life, rummaging through Wen Manor's storage rooms. An old wooden box held leftover fragments from her infancy. Inside sat a wooden tally recording unpaid debts owed to the tea stall at White Stone Bridge from that exact year. Back then she had thought it worthless rubbish. Now she wondered, if House One had no real connection to that tea stall, why would they preserve that old debt tally? Lila told Third Elder One about the wooden tally. He frowned at, how could you possibly know about items locked deep inside House One's storage vault? I dreamed of it, Lila answered that naturally he did not fully believe her. But Lila had guessed correctly about so many other details already. He wrote a letter back to the capital, ordering servants to search through the storage rooms. That a few days later, word came back. That old wooden box had vanished. The servant in charge of storage said Alara had recently been sorting through discarded old belongings. She had carted away a pile of what everyone thought was junk. Alara had finally revealed her hand. She feared what that wooden tally might prove. The deeper her fear grew, the more it confirmed how vital that piece of evidence really was. Lila asked shopkeeper Jove to dig into the history of the long-gone White Stone Bridge tea shop using his wide-reaching business contacts. She also sent Kale out along with several local village boys. They hunted for elderly folk who had worked near that bridge 13 years before. Kale was young, with a sweet, easygoing tongue. He could get local residents to talk far more easily than any grown-up investigator. Several days passed. Kale brought back crucial news. The original owner of that old tea shop was still alive. He had changed his name and moved to a neighboring county. These days he ran a simple noodle stall. Lila chose not to travel there herself. She told Third Elder One to send his own men to bring the man in for questioning. This way, the witness had been located by the One clan. They could not accuse Lila of bribing him to give false testimony. When the former tea shop owner stood before Third Elder One, he denied knowing anything at first. Only after the elder showed him a copied record of the ancient debt tally did he finally start speaking. The One household carriage really had stopped at his tea shop that day. The baby had not been snatched by some outside kidnapper. A woman dressed as a One household servant had carried the infant out of the carriage. She claimed Lady One found the baby's crying too disruptive. She said she would give the child a calming herbal drink and bring her back shortly. That servant handed the baby over to a man driving a mule cart. That man gave her a small pouch filled with silver coins. The tea shop owner remembered this incident clearly, because that servant owed him money for tea. She settled her bill using that very same wooden tally from House One. Later, somebody paid a large sum of silver to buy that tally back from him. Third Elder One pressed for the servant's identity. The shop owner could not describe her face in detail. But one detail stuck in his memory. On her left hand, half of her little finger was missing. She always wore a protective metal finger guard over that hand. In her past life, Lila had never noticed that detail. When she met Aunt Sula in this new timeline, she had only thought the brass keyring hanging at her waist felt familiar. She had never once looked closely at her hands. Third Elder One immediately sent men to place Aunt Sula under watch. But she was already gone. House One claimed she had fallen ill and returned to her home village. Alara also announced she was sick, shut her doors, and refused to receive any visitors. They burned old evidence, hid key witnesses, sent Aunt Sula away. They tried to dodge all questioning by pretending to be unwell. If Lila had still been the helpless girl from her first life, who only knew how to weep and beg for kindness, they would have dragged her forcibly back to the capital long before now. But Lila had learned to wait. She had learned to trace people through money trails. Aunt Sula's nephew owned a cloth shop in the local town. Back in her past life, Lila had heard household gossip inside the One Manor. Aunt Sula doted on this nephew more than anyone else. She had even purchased that shop building for him. In this new life, Lila asked shopkeeper Jove to trace the origins of the shop's finances. Following the accounts proved simple enough. The cloth shop had suddenly expanded 3 years earlier, exactly when House One had discovered Lila lived in Greenbank Village. Bank drafts funding this growth came from a private account under Alara's name. This was no direct hard proof of the infant abduction 13 years prior. Still, it served as solid evidence. 3 years before, somebody had paid Aunt Sula handsomely to bury the truth forever. When Third Elder One got hold of those account books, his face darkened with terrifying, unbridled rage. At last he understood. The gentle, obedient adopted daughter House One praised constantly hid a completely different side beneath her sweet exterior. Alara, had not been the mastermind behind Lila's abduction all those years ago. Back then she had only been a small child herself. But 3 years earlier, once she learned the truth, she chose to keep every secret buried. She had shifted from being a beneficiary of the crime to becoming an accomplice. Aunt Sula was captured on a rainy day. She knelt inside the village ancestral hall. They removed her metal finger guard, just as the tea shop owner described. Half of her left little finger was missing, that she gritted her teeth and insisted every evil act came from her own greed. She claimed she had sold infant Lila to human traffickers. No other person bore any guilt. Lila challenged her. If this was pure greed, Lila said, where is all that silver you earned? Aunt Sula said the money had long since been spent. Also, Lila pressed, if you sold me to traffickers, why was I abandoned on the riverbank near Greenbank Village, and not carried far away to some distant place? Aunt Sula clamped her mouth shut tight, and refused to answer that the truly decisive proof still lay just out of reach. Lila understood Aunt Sula was not afraid of punishment from Lady One. What terrified her was Alara exposing the fact she had accepted hush money 3 years before. That would drag her nephew, along with his entire wife, children and business, down into ruin alongside her. Lila laid copies of the cloth shop ledgers directly in front of Aunt Sula. 13 years ago you harmed me, Lila said. That is an old crime. 3 years ago you took payment to stay silent. That is a brand new crime. After so many years, the old offense might be hard to prove. But these banknotes and account books document the new crime perfectly. If you take full blame for other people's misdeeds, your nephew's shop, his family, everything he owns will all be destroyed. Aunt Sula began to shake all over. At last she started to confess. It had been Lady Wen's personal maid, Mama Ju, who had ordered her to take the infant Lila away. Mama Ju was already long dead by this point. That after giving birth to Lila, Lady Wen had fallen dangerously ill. One misfortune followed another. Her husband's official career hopes hit a wall. The old matriarch grew sick. A destructive fire broke out within the manor. A fortune-teller told Lady Wen her newborn daughter carried a harsh fate, one that would bring disaster onto every member of her family. Lady Wen believed those words. Terrified that openly sending her own child away would draw her husband's anger, she instructed Mama Ju to dispose of infant Lila far from home. Mama Ju, driven by greed, had not simply abandoned the baby. She sold her to the man with the mule cart. But when that man saw how sick and close to death tiny Lila was, he dared not carry her further. So he dumped her on the riverbank close to Greenbank Village. That was exactly where Mara had found her. Nobody spoke a single word in that room. Lila had expected to cry, yet she felt oddly calm. In her past life, she had cherished every small hope for her birth mother's love. One cold sentence from Lady One, rejecting her as her daughter, had left Lila heartbroken for weeks. Now that she finally held the full truth, one thing became crystal clear. It was never that Lila was not good enough to earn her mother's affection. From the very moment Lila drew breath in this world, Lady One had seen her as nothing more than an evil curse. Third Elder One spoke up. And 3 years ago? Aunt Sula's eyes drifted toward Alara, who stood in the doorway. Her skin was as white as crumpled paper. That Aunt Sula admitted Alara had learned the truth 3 years prior. She had given Aunt Sula silver to keep silent. Alara had said if House One suddenly brought home a crude, unpolished village girl, the whole capital would laugh at them. They ought to wait until Alara's marriage arrangements were fully settled. Only then should they retrieve Lila. Alara shook her head violently. Tears poured down her face. I was only afraid, she cried. I never intended for anyone to get hurt. Lila brought up the attack on Peddler who. Alara would not meet Lila's gaze. Zia the maid knelt down and claimed she had arranged the beating all on her own. Lila remembered that rainy night beside the dry well from her past life. She echoed that memory out loud. Back then, did you also claim you acted entirely alone? Zia looked utterly confused and frightened. She could not understand Lila's reference. Events that had only unfolded in Lila's previous life could not serve as real-world evidence. Lila would rely only on proof from this timeline. Records of Agarwood purchases whose injuries, confessions from the hired thugs, witness statements from the tea shop incident. All of this evidence wove together, thoroughly implicating Alara. Chaos exploded throughout the entire Wen household. Lady Wen hurried over from the capital. The very first thing she did upon seeing Lila was not to embrace her, not to weep for her lost child. Her eyes flew straight to Alara. Alara, she said anxiously. Why have you grown so thin? Lila stood off to one side. For a fleeting moment, she felt pity for that girl from her past life, who had ached so desperately to hear even one small word of care from her birth mother, that Lady Wen began to cry. She told Lila she had only been delirious with fever all those years ago. She swore she had regretted her choice every single day. Lila asked her the unavoidable question, when you learned 3 years ago that I was alive and living in Greenbank Village, why did you never come for me? Lady Wen's lips trembled. She could find no words to answer. Lord Wen also arrived. He looked far older than how Lila recalled him from her past life. Back when Lila first returned to the manor in her previous existence, he had only spoken quietly. It is good that you are home. Whenever conflict arose after that, he always told Lila she ought to understand her mother, understand her grandmother, understand Alara. Now confronted with all the uncovered truth, he looked like a man emptied of all spirit. He did not try to defend Lady Wen. He only turned toward Lila. Lila, come home with your father. Lila looked directly at him. Where exactly is home? Lord Wen froze. In Greenbank Village, Lila explained. I have my own bed. There is my mother's medicine pot. There sits Kale's wooden book chest. Does the capital Wen Manor hold a courtyard truly meant for me? Lord Wen rushed to reassure her they could prepare one. Will it be a brand new courtyard built for me? Lila asked. Or will it be the very courtyard Alara has occupied for 13 years? If I go back, where will Mara stay? Where will Kale study? And what will become of Alara? Everything will be arranged properly, Lord Wen promised. Lila smiled bitterly. In her past life she feared that phrase, everything will be arranged. Every single arrangement had demanded Lila be the one to yield and sacrifice. This time, she pushed forward a written document she had prepared long in advance. I will travel to the capital alongside Third Elder Wen to register my name in the clan genealogy. But only under these set conditions. First, Mara would be formally entered in family records as Lila's foster mother. House Wen must provide for her for the rest of her life. No person in the household could ever treat her with disrespect. Second, Kale's education would be fully funded by House Wen. He would never be forced into servitude. No one household members could give him orders. Third, Alara would be officially reclassified as an adopted daughter. Moving forward, during any marriage negotiations, she could no longer claim the status of House Wen's trueborn biological daughter. Fourth, Lady Wen's act of abandoning her own infant child would be written down as a fault within the clan archives. She must surrender her authority to manage the household's inner quarters affairs. Fifth, Mama Ju and Zia must be handed over to government officials for judgment. And finally, 13 years' worth of living costs, medical care, and education that House Wen owed Lila would be converted into land and property deeds, registered solely under Lila's own name. Lady Wen let out a sharp cry of outrage. You seek to destroy the entire Wen family. Lila shook her head. No, she replied calmly. I am only writing down clearly everything you owe me. Lord Wen closed his eyes. At long last he put his signature on the document. The old matriarch never traveled out to the village. She only sent a letter. She wrote that blood bonds could never be cut. She begged Lila to put the family's collective interests first. Lila tossed that letter straight into the brazier fire. In her past life she had valued family ties above everything. Yet when she died, no one had even bothered gathering her bones. In this new life, she would put herself first. Alara was sent away to a secluded villa outside the capital city. Her reputation as a brilliant young poet did not collapse overnight, but it would never again be spotless and untarnished. The powerful high-status family she had hoped to marry called off their engagement. Later Alara came to visit Lila one final time. She wore simple, plain clothing. Are you satisfied now? Alara asked. Not yet. Lila answered. Alara stared at her with eyes full of venom. I will only be satisfied, Lila continued, once my foster mother's health improves. Once Kale can study in peace. Once Aunt Sula faces official judgment. Once the old case is properly filed in government records. Once no one can wield your fame and status to crush my existence ever again. Tears streamed down Alara's face. You could have returned to the capital and lived as a one family daughter, she said. Why must you push for all of this? Lila's gaze drifted toward locust blossoms laid out to dry in the courtyard sunlight. Because I refused to mistake charity-given rice for a real home. She told her. Alara turned and walked away without glancing back. Months rolled by. The county court delivered judgment for Aunt Sula. The original events lay too far in the distant past. Mama Ju was dead. Lady Wen escaped harsh criminal punishment on account of her severe illness at the time of Lila's abandonment. Lila understood perfect justice was impossible under old-world rules of nobility. A lady from a scholarly clan would not easily be locked in prison simply for abandoning her infant daughter years ago. Still, Lady Wen lost her household authority. Her good name was ruined. She lost Lord Wen's trust forever. The One clan wrote the whole shameful story into their official family archives. Every time she stepped out into public, folk would remember she had cast away her own flesh and blood child, as if she were a curse. That was her price to pay. Zia, for hiring thugs to commit violence, was sentenced to beating with rods and sold into servitude. Alara pleaded for mercy on Zia's behalf. Third Elder Wen stopped her. If you truly felt pity for her, he said, you ought never to have asked her to carry out your dirty work in the first place. Those words drifted over to Lila, as she sat bent over, teaching Kale how to write. His handwriting was still crooked and wobbly. Kale looked up and asked, will the One household come to drag you away again? No, Lila told him. Then from now on, are you Lila May, or are you Wen Lila? Lila thought carefully for a moment. In the official family registry, I am Wen Lila. Here in Greenbank Village, I will always remain Lila May. Kale pressed his lips together and smiled. My sister has 2 names. That makes her better than everyone else. Mara laughed until tears rolled down her cheeks. Her health slowly grew better. The land deeds given by House Wen were not vast, yet they guaranteed her family would never go hungry again. Lila did not merely sit back and live off what she had been given. She expanded her mountain goods trading business. Shopkeeper Jove helped her build business connections. Several pastry shops in nearby county towns began buying dried locust blossoms and smoked plums supplied by Greenbank Village. Village women all gained steady work. Lila still could not read every single written character, but she forced herself to learn 10 new ones every single day. If her handwriting looked messy, she rewrote the characters again and again. In her past life, she learned reading to avoid being looked down on by the One household. In this new life, she learned so she could understand account books and write her own name fully and freely. 1 year later, Lila traveled with Third Elder Wen to the capital to formally enter her name in the clan genealogy. This was her very first time stepping inside the One Manor in this new lifetime. Its towering main gate stood grand and imposing. Back in her past life, standing in this spot had filled her with nervous anxiety. She had not known what to do with her own hands. This time Lila carried a small wooden box. Inside sat shoes Mara had sewn for her, short practice notes written by Kale, and the very first account ledger from her mountain goods business. Lord Wen waited for her near the gate. His temples had turned far whiter. If you wish, he said, we have a courtyard all prepared for you within this estate. Lila bowed respectfully. Thank you, father, but I will not stay. Lady Wen never appeared to greet her. Lila heard she remained ill, spending all her days copying Buddhist sutras inside the prayer hall. Lila made no effort to visit her. The bond between birth mother and daughter could never be repaired simply by a name written on paper. Lila acknowledged that Lady Wen had given her life. She also could not erase the truth that Lady Wen had abandoned her. Those 2 facts together made up their complete story. When the old matriarch saw Lila, she wept heavily. She grasped Lila's hands. Grandchild, your grandmother has wronged you. Lila did not pull her hands away, but she did not return the embrace. Please take care of yourself, grandmother. The light in the old woman's eyes dimmed. In Lila's past life, she had desperately chased her grandmother's approval. Now she understood. Affection that arrives far too late exists only to soothe the guilty feelings of the person giving it. Lila could accept an apology. She would not spend the rest of her life fixing their regrets for them. On the day her name was inscribed into the clan genealogy, all members of House 1 gathered. The record read when Lila. A side note explained she had been separated from the family in childhood and raised by Mara of Greenbank Village. Another entry stated plainly, Alara adopted daughter, raised by House 1. The moment those words were set down in ink, a quiet sob echoed from outside the corridor. It was Alara. She did not step into the room. Lila never turned around. Neither of them could ever return to how things might have been. Still this time, Lila had not been erased before she left the capital. Lord Wen handed over a box filled with bank drafts. Lila refused to take everything. She only accepted exactly what their signed contract specified. She gave the rest back. This is a father's compensation for you. Lord Wen said that a compensation laid out in a written contract is enough, Lila replied. If you wish to offer affection, you may give it slowly over time. But do not try to buy my forgetting with silver. Lord Wen's eyes grew red. May I still travel out to Greenbank Village to see you? Lila paused for a short moment. You may come. But send word ahead of time. Do not bring a huge crowd of attendants. Do not frighten my mother. He promised he would. In that instant, Lila realized she no longer hated him. Not hating did not equal complete forgiveness. It simply meant she refused to trap herself inside the weight of his guilt. At the day she returned to Greenbank Village, Kale came sprinting out to meet her. Mara had baked locust blossom cakes. When Lila bit into one, tears nearly welled up. Back inside the Wen Manor, she had eaten countless fancy, delicate pastries. None of them had ever tasted so solid, so real. Life moved forward step by step after that. Kale passed the entrance exam for the county academy. Village women continued working within the mountain goods trade. Household after household earned a little surplus money. Lila and shopkeeper Jove opened a small shop together. They named it Peace Beneath the Moon. Those were the 4 characters that ought to have been carved onto her lost infant golden lock charm. That lock was later recovered from Wen Manor storage and sent to Lila. She never wore it. Instead, she placed it underneath her shop's account books. It served as her constant reminder. True peace is not something gifted to you by others. It is something you fight to build, bit by bit, for yourself. Eventually Alara married far away. Lila heard her husband's family held no great rank, yet they treated her decently. Once Alara sent Lila a letter. She wrote she often dreamed of that night in Greenbank Village, the lantern light glowing and Lila's hard questions. At last she understood fear never justified hurting other people. Lila read the letter, stored it inside her wooden keepsake box, and never wrote a reply. Between the two of them, there was no need for more closure. 3 years later, Lady Wen passed away. Lord Wen sent a letter asking whether Lila would travel back to the capital for the funeral. Lila went. She went not to grant forgiveness, but to draw a final closing chapter for the woman who had given her birth and then cast her aside. Inside the mourning hall, she lit 1 stick of incense. Lord Wen stood beside her and spoke quietly. She kept calling your name in her final moments. I have heard, Lila said. Inside her heart she felt completely still. Some names, spoken far too late, can only vanish away upon the wind. As Lila prepared to leave the Wen Manor grounds, the old matriarch stopped her. Lila, she said. There is one question grandmother has always wanted to ask. If we had come for you much earlier, would you have chosen to stay with us? Lila looked out over the long capital street. She pictured the hopeful, hungry girl she had been in her past life. She also remembered the stove fire burning bright back in Greenbank Village, in this new reality. Yes, Lila answered. But you did not. The old matriarch broke down into bitter tears. Lila stayed no longer. Her carriage pulled away from the capital. Spring wind lifted the fabric curtain. This was not Greenbank Village, yet the sky above shone equally bright. Lila rested her hand on the account book sitting on her lap. Suddenly she felt like laughing. In her past life, she had believed she was a Wen daughter simply trapped in the wrong place. She had fought desperately to return to where she thought she belonged. Only in this new life did she truly understand. A person's place in the world is never decided by blood ties, family names, public reputation, or anyone else's favor. She could be a simple village farmer's daughter. She could be a daughter of House 1. She could be Lila May. A woman who started out barely able to read a single character, and slowly taught herself every letter. She could be Mara's adopted daughter, Kale's elder sister. Or she could simply be herself that when her birth family tracked her down, she refused to ride away with them. It was not because she rejected the very idea of kinship. She finally understood what real kinship ought to look like. True family does not force you to abandon the people who raised you. It does not sneer at your rough edges and humble beginnings. It does not demand you spend your whole life proving you deserve to be loved. Once she had died trapped at the bottom of a dry stone well. In this lifetime, she had risen again beside her kitchen stove. Firelight glowed across her palms. Those hands were rough. They had gripped wood-cutting tools, counted copper coins. Later they would hold writing brushes, sign legal contracts, and write her own name. She looked down at her palms and smiled softly that on that day she refused to go back to the one household. She thought she was giving up great wealth. Only later did she realize that was the exact day she finally seized hold of her own fate. Part 2. The Duke who could not hide his heart. Now let's shift over to our second story. Picture a grand royal wedding day. Our heroine is Lin Xiao. She's just been wed to Duke Gubiju. Right there at their wedding feast, Gubiju makes a fool of himself in the most unexpected way. Gubiju was saying, "I thought she would never even measure up against a single strand of hair belonging to the woman I adore." But the very next second, just glancing at Lin Xiao's face made his nose start pouring blood. He fumbled wildly, yanking a cloth handkerchief out to wipe his face. Flustered and furious all at once, he shouted at her. "Don't get silly ideas," he barked. "I was only shocked by how hideous you look." Lin Xiao watched him with thoughtful eyes. "But you're holding my handkerchief." She pointed out that Gubiju's whole body stiffened. "I must have grabbed the wrong one," he stammered. He tried to pull another cloth article out from inside his robe. In his panicked rush, he pulled out one of her undergarments, her fragrant sachet, and even one of her socks. The palace wedding banquet was drawing close to its end. Gubiju's mother-in-law insisted Lin Xiao go home with her new husband. She kept saying it would be best for them to conceive an heir that very night. Lin Xiao headed over reluctantly. She arrived just in time to overhear Gubiju chatting with one of his close male friends. "Brother Jiao," the friend said, "I hear since your wedding you haven't laid eyes on your new bride even once. You leave her all alone day after day. You are incredibly cold-hearted." Gubiju snorted, his expression icy. "You all know I have spent years searching for Qing. I've kept myself pure for her sake. How could I ever touch another woman?" "Fair enough," his friend replied. "I have seen your bride. She has delicate features, yet she lacks the breathtaking beauty of famous capital beauties. If the emperor had not wanted to keep you in check, arranging this marriage to a girl of humble origins, a woman like her would never have crossed the threshold of your ducal mansion." Gubiju gave no clear answer. He did not disagree. Listening to their conversation, Lin Xiao felt as if a full basin of icy water had been dumped over her head. On their actual wedding day, Gubiju had sent someone to pass her a message. He told her he would remain faithful to the woman he loved. He would never touch her. Back then she had thought it was just an excuse to brush her off. She had never imagined he meant every single word. If that was truly his stance, she told herself she ought not push her luck. She turned to slip away. As she stepped backward, her foot accidentally kicked a large wine jar sitting on the ground. It shattered with a deafening crash. Every man in that group spun their heads around to stare. "Speak of the devil," one man joked. "Brother Gu, here comes your wife." Now that they had spotted her, hiding was impossible. She had to summon all her courage and call out, "Husband." The moment that word left her lips, Gubiju shot straight to his feet. He strode toward her with an intimidating, heavy presence. "You have quite a lot of nerve," he snapped. "I told you long ago we ought to live separate lives from this point forward. How dare you come chasing after me? Do you truly believe you hold the position of my wife?" As he spoke, his tall figure loomed right over her. Their eyes met. His voice cut off mid-sentence. He froze completely, motionless. Lin Xiao avoided his intense stare. Nervously, she twisted the handkerchief in her fingers. "It is not my wish," she told him. "Mother insisted I come fetch you so we could return home together." When Gubiju still stood there, completely unresponsive, she glanced upward. Her heart skipped a beat. You have blood streaming from your nose. Instinctively, she held out her handkerchief toward him. He suddenly grabbed hold of her wrist. Lin Xiu feared he was about to strike her. Panic flooded over her. If you do not wish to go home, forget it, she said quickly. I will go explain everything to your mother. With that, she wrenched her wrist free and hurried away. That after she had walked some distance, she saw he was not chasing her. She wiped sweat off her forehead and breathed out in huge relief. Once Gubiju had stopped his nosebleed, he turned quiet and withdrawn. His friend could not resist teasing him. Brother Gu, why were you staring so hard just now? And you got a nosebleed over your own bride. Gubiju snapped back to reality. He cleared his throat awkwardly. It is all her fault. She tried to seduce me. Did you not see her batting her eyelashes? She even wore my favorite jasmine scent. She certainly knows how to play her tricks. His friend's eyebrows drew together in confusion. I have known you more than 10 years. I have never once heard you mention liking jasmine fragrance before. Something is off about your behavior ever since you met her. Could you have fallen for her at first sight, just like Brother Lu? Gubiju jumped to his feet, looking alarmed. How could I possibly fall for her? She only has slightly larger eyes, a slimmer waist, fair skin, and a pleasant-sounding voice. There is nothing special about her. The more he argued, the rougher his voice grew. He reached for his drinking bowl. His friend snatched it away before he could drink. That is my cup, the friend said. He sighed and patted Gubiju's shoulder. It is good you understand that. But you must hold firm. Do not end up like Brother Lu. He swore solemn wedding oaths. And right after marriage he practically threw himself all over his wife. Now he has zero dignity in his own household, acting like her obedient lapdog. Gubiju declared with total conviction that I would never turn out like him. Good, his friend replied. I just saw your bride wiping away tears. Do not soften your heart. Otherwise all your past resolve will go completely to waste. When those words landed, Gubiju's smile vanished. His hands hanging down at his sides clenched into tight fists. Brother Lu, who had been the subject of their mockery, heard all of this. He felt no shame at all. Instead he spoke with obvious pride that, now I have a wife. Why should I care about keeping my pride? Why would she choose to keep me as her lapdog? Because she likes me, of course. And you, Brother Gu, that promise you made out of gratitude for being saved was 10 years ago. Who knows? Maybe that woman Qinger is long since married with children running all around her yard. You ought to cherish the woman who stands right in front of you. I think your bride is quite nice. The man sitting beside Brother Lu quickly nudged his elbow. He whispered for him to keep his voice down. If he kept talking like this, Gubiju would fly into a rage. Everyone knew Gubiju was utterly devoted to Qinger. Getting him to give up on her felt as impossible as waiting for the sun to rise in the west. That as the two men whispered to each other, Gubiju mumbled under his breath that, I think he may be right. In an instant, total silence fell across the whole group. His friends stared at him, completely disbelieving. Brother Gu, what exactly did you just say? Gubiju spun around toward one of his nearby guards. What was that you said? The poor guard looked utterly confused. At her? What about her? Mother sends urgent word summoning me home, Gubiju announced. My apologies to everyone. I must depart. We will gather for drinks another day. He spoke as he hurried off. The guard tried to ask follow-up questions, but the other men surrounded him. What happened back at the ducal estate? The guard scratched his head. I truly have no idea. I cannot say anything. Our duke's household runs with extremely strict household rules. Back at the ducal mansion, Lin Xiu took a hot bath. She was ready to sleep soundly. But the moment she stepped out of the bathhouse, she received a big shock. Her husband Gubiju had returned home that night. Her face held no trace of makeup. She watched him frown, looking her up and down as she expected mocking insults, just like at the banquet. Instead his cheeks flushed bright red. He snorted coldly. You have far too many tricks for luring men. Lin Xiu glanced down at her worn night clothes and messy hair. Before she could ask what he meant, he had already sat down. Since mother sent you to fetch me, you must have things you wish to say. Seeing he intended to get straight to business, Lin Xiu decided to match his direct tone. Mother says the ducal household cannot go without an heir. She wants us to conceive a child soon. Gubiju let out a cold laugh. Do you think making a child is as simple as wishing for one? Do I look like such a careless man? Lin Xiu nodded quickly. She turned to hunt for a small booklet she had just received. I know you hold another woman in your heart. Naturally, I hold no foolish hopes. But Mother has laid out a clear path, and I believe it is worth giving it a try. She spun around, eager to show him the booklet. She froze, stunned by the sight in front of her. Somehow Gubiju had already stripped off his outer robes. Firm, well-muscled skin was exposed. A few drops of bathwater still glistened on his chest. They traced lines over his abdominal muscles before disappearing under his loosely tied lower shorts. Lin Xiu's throat went dry. She could not look away. Gubiju snatched the booklet straight.